There we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another class with Michaels and Singer Sewing. My name is Bethany, and it's been a little while since I have seen you all. We haven't done a class together since before Christmas, so we're so happy to be back in the new year and doing a new project with you all. And this one is like my favorite project. I love making these and sewing with rope. And so I'm excited to bring this to you today. So we're going to kind of jump right in because we have a lot to discuss and learn today. But if you didn't get the instructions, they're downloaded. They should have been emailed to you. We can drop them in the chat as well. But you're going to want those during this class today so you can take notes along the way. We're going to sew a bunch of different things so you can learn the steps to do everything. And then you can take that with you to sew later at your own time. But real quick, I want to let you all know that there are a couple people in the chat today helping me out. So while I'm sewing and teaching you, they can help answer your questions. So Amy is one of the Amy's. We have two Amy's. So Amy Mulroney is there. She's going to help answer any questions about the products and materials we're using, and she'll link those for you directly from michaels.com. And then Amy McMullen is there and Sonny Grant is there, and they're both helping answer any sewing related questions. So don't hesitate to drop those in the chat. If they feel like it's something I need to repeat, they'll let me know, and then I'll take the time to do that, okay? All right, so if you can't tell, I made a lot of these to show you all today and have on display. I think they're so much fun. When I make one of these and gift it to a friend or family member, they just love them. And so it just makes me feel good about making them and gifting them, and they're really easy. So I'm excited to show you how to do it. But I thought if you kind of read the instructions, I thought I would kind of approach it the same way. So what I'm going to teach you today is how to start with a coaster. So we're going to make something kind of like this, a coaster. This is a quick and easy sew, but the way you start out the coaster and make this foundation is the same for a bowl and a basket. So I thought I'd show you the coaster, and then I already have a base made for a bowl because it's the same process. And then I'm going to show you how to build the sides of a bowl. And then the way to do that is the same way for a basket. And then I'm going to show you how to do the handles for a basket. So we're going to learn something new for each project, but it's all about building on itself. Okay. So let's talk about materials that you need for the class today. Obviously you're going to need some sort of rope. I got a couple from Michaels I wanted to show you. So there's different types of rope. Some people call it cotton rope or cording. You can also, some places call it clothesline rope. But basically you want a braided rope, okay? Now, this one I got from Michaels is 4 millimeters in diameter, and this roll is 50 yards, which is a lot of rope. And I love that it came on a spool because then I didn't have to unwind it and roll it back up into a ball to be able to sew. It won't get tangled or twisted. So this is really nice to be able to sew right off of the spool. This is another rope that I got from Michaels. This one is not braided. This one is twisted. This is more commonly used for macrame projects. You can use this for flat objects like coasters or a big flat like hot pads or things like that. But to build a basket or a bowl with this, it's not as tight. So your basket or bowl may not hold its shape as well. So you can try it, but I do recommend a braided rope. So that's what we're going to use today. Yeah, I'll show them up close when we switch to that. Is that okay? But yeah, so those are what you're going to need. You're going to need thread and a lot of thread. I have a bobbin that's full already in the machine ready to go, but I do have a spare ready as well. When I do the big baskets, I go through several bobbins. So it's always smart to have several ready before you start sewing. Just makes it a lot easier and faster. Something else that you're going to need today is Fray check. This is very helpful with cleaning up the ends so that they look really nice when you start and into your basket. You're going to need some scissors, things like that. And the other thing is I'm going to also show you all today how to put fabric on your bowl or basket or whatever on the rope and then sew it as part of the basket. This is a fun way and an easy way to dress up your finished project as you're making it, but it's a great way to utilize scrap fabrics. So I know we all have baskets and bins. I have multiple bins of scrap fabrics I just can't part with. I know one day I'll find a use for it, and this is a great way. So these strips, and I kind of explain this in the instructions, these are 1-inch strips that I'm using. And these are cut on the bias, which means it's cut with the grain. at a 45-degree angle. So this woven fabric now becomes stretchy, and that will help stretch it around tight around the rope, and it'll prevent it from fraying as bad. So this is a fun way. This one right here in the back and this one right here both have fabric wrapped around parts of the rope. So it's just a fun little added character to this plain basket. So we're gonna jump right in if there's not any other questions. Okay, awesome. Can we switch real quick to camera 2? Perfect. So I've got a couple of angles we're gonna try today because of the way this project is kind of builds upon itself. But one thing I wanted to point out to you is this extension table here. This is something that you can get for your sewing machine. We're obviously using the heavy duty. I'm gonna kind of zoom this back for a second. So I have the extension table here that I added because you want a flat surface for your base of your project. You don't want it to bend or curve, then the base of your bowl or basket will not be flat. And that will make it difficult when building up the sides, okay? So if you don't have an extension table, you can get some books to put up next to the end of your machine. As long as it's level with this sewing surface right here of your machine, it's really important. I put on the extension table today, and today I'm sewing on the heavy duty 4452. You do not need a heavy duty machine to make these and sew with rope, but it definitely makes it a lot easier because these are full steel frame machines. So they're really heavy, which makes them really sturdy. So I'm going to set this camera back down so I'm not wobbling.
What size needle are we using?
So the needle, that was the next thing I was going to say. Good question. The needle that I'm using today is a denim needle. You can use a heavy duty needle or a denim needle. I highly recommend using a denim needle because you're going to be sewing through the rope. And then you need to change your needle every 6 to 8 hours of sewing. These really large baskets that I sew are about 200 feet of rope, and it takes me about 4 hours, especially if I'm going to take the time to wrap fabric around it. So 3 to 4 hours. So after about 2 baskets, I'm changing out that needle, and you'll know when it's time to change it out. You don't want it to look bad on the backside because that's the outside of your basket, and that's what's going to show. Does that help answer that question? So I just put in a brand new needle this morning, and we're gonna start sewing. Now the rope that I'm using right for today is another braided rope, and this one has a synthetic cord. That's what that colored part is right here. And when I get started with my basket, I twist this in to really tight, and I don't want that to show. So I usually kind of separate it, and I'll take some scissors and I'll cut out that synthetic core, just like that. And then I kind of fold it back up, and then you can't see it. And then this is when you want to use that Fray check. Put a couple of drops right here and just kind of shape it and let it dry, and it'll dry clear. And then that's going to give you a nice end to start the center of your bowl or your basket, whatever you're making, your coaster. So we're going to start with a coaster. And I've already got my rope prepped and ready. So this is what it'll look like when I get that Fray check on there, and I've cleared out a little bit of that colorful core, synthetic core. That part is what gives it the strength to help it build and hold its shape. Now you guys wanted to see these two real quick up close. This is the braided rope, and then this is a twisted rope. This is more commonly used for macrame. This is what I recommend for making bigger baskets and bowls for them to hold their shape better. Okay, it's a skinnier rope, but it's a stronger rope and it's tougher. This is a lot softer. I can really squeeze it. This doesn't do that. So this is what I would recommend. Now, when you see some of my projects today that I've done, you'll see that they're colored, and I didn't wrap them in fabric. So there are other ways to add color to your projects, and you can use dye, which I used Rit dye. I know you can get Rit dye at michaels.com, but I use dyes, and I just dip dyed different sections of the rope to get these kind of like ombre effects. And I thought it was a fun way to add color to the project. You can dip dye the whole thing and make the whole thing a fun color. I did these little pink ones for Valentine's. So that's a fun way to add some color without using fabric, but I'm also going to show you how to do it with the fabric. So let's just get right in. Now, the first thing we're going to do, and I'm going to do my best to show this with you. This is a very hands-in project, so forgive me if my hands get in the way. But we're going to wind up the beginning, and we want to get it pretty tight. And I know that's kind of hard to see with my fingers all. Good thing I got a manicure. Let's see here. I'm going to show you in just a second, but I am just winding this tight, and I want to get it about 1 inch in diameter to start. So see, it's got a little seashell look, like a little snail. So these little pieces right here, you won't see any of that once we stitch over it. And you want it to go clockwise. Okay, you don't want it to go counterclockwise. We're going to be sewing clockwise. Now you can do a couple things here. You can hold this and stick it right under the foot, or you can take a pin and stick it through to help secure it in place until you get it under the foot. Okay, and then I am going to place this under the foot. Now my foot is already up, but I have this extra lift, which makes it so helpful for getting this thicker, this rope under here. I'm going to place my foot. Now I'm good to go. I can go ahead and remove my pin because it's stable. Now the foot I'm using today is a clear open toe decorative foot, or a clear decorative foot. I chose this foot because it gives me the most visibility in seeing where I'm going. It has a little notch right in the center, and you'll see that that's the kind of the notch that we're going to be following along when we start building onto this. Okay. For the settings for your machine, you're going to need to set it to a zigzag stitch. I set my length at like 2.5 to 3. That's totally up to you on preference. I wouldn't go too much further than that. You want your stitches somewhat close together so that it gives the project stability. And then for the width of your zigzag, this machine goes up to a 6. Our computerized heavy duty goes up to a 5. I kind of stick around that 5 because that'll catch both sides of the rope as we're stitching along. Okay. So I have mine set to a width of 5, a stitch length of 2.5, and then it's a zigzag stitch. This is the stitch you're going to use for this entire project. Today, I'm going to sew with a black thread so you can really see it. I also think the black thread or any colored thread on this neutral rope really adds a fun way to decorate the project as well. But if you use a white thread or a cream thread, you won't see the thread at all when it's done, which is also really nice if you want something very plain. So my foot is down. Let me find my foot control here. I'm going to just drop my needle real quick. And we're just going to sew straight across. I know it's kind of hard to see. Straight across the spiral that we started. Actually, Jimena, can we switch to camera 3? See if that's a better angle for while I'm sewing. Let's try that. So I'm going to do a couple back stitches. I'm going to back stitch all the way back. We want our base to be really strong. So I kind of go back and forth a couple of times. And I'm going to lift my foot here. And can you see how on the camera, see how I did the straight across? And this is when you're going to want to trim your thread. You want to trim them as you go so they don't get caught up under your stitches. Amy and Amy, do we have any questions? No? Okay, cool.
They did ask, are you using a cotton or a polyester thread or rope?
This is a cotton rope, but it does have a synthetic core. So that's a good question. That's what makes it so tough. That was that little colored piece I trimmed out in the beginning.
Thank you.
All right, so now we're going to turn it and we're going to stick it back under our foot and we're going to go across the other way. We're basically making an X. X marks the spot. We're going to start with that. There we go. Extra lift on the foot definitely helps get the rope out from under the foot. I'm going to trim my threads. This is a project that's like comes in super handy for the thread catcher. I don't know if you all remember that project we did back in September for National Sewing Month, but the thread catcher is like my new favorite thing in my sewing room. All right, so this is my little X. And now I'm gonna switch back to camera 2 real quick. Yeah. Perfect, thank you. It's a little easier to show this up close. So here's my center core and my little tail coming off, and then here's my ball of rope that it's attached to. And we're gonna build on this. Now that I've got this, I don't need to go around all of this here. It's really tight. What I typically do, I don't start right here where it's coming off. I typically go back to the next one and start here. And I'm gonna line the center of my foot up with the kind of the line between this rope and the outside rope, the inside rope and the outside rope. And that's the line that you're gonna follow all the way around, okay? So I'm gonna get my foot, my rope back under the foot here.
Bethany, we have a few questions about your thread. Are you using the contrasting thread today just for teaching purposes?
Yes, I'm using it so you can see the black thread and the stitches really well on camera. But here's a project using black thread for the entire thing. And I think it looks really fun to use the colored thread. I think it would be really fun to use a thread that changes colors as you make the bowl. That would be really fun. You can do lots of different colors, and I think this is a fun way to add a little pizzazz to the project without doing fabric or dyeing the rope. So this is a fun, easy make.
Also, what type and weight of thread are you using?
That's a good question. So here, I will look real quick just to make sure I tell this to you correctly. This is just a cotton thread. It doesn't have
40 weight.
40. Yeah, oh, here it is right here. I have my thumb over it. It's 40 weight. So it's just a cotton thread. And then I wound my bobbins with that because I want it to be the same on the inside and outside of my basket. So nice and strong. So now what I've done is I've lined the center of my foot up here. I'm going to see if I can zoom in for you guys. There we go. And we're just going to do the zigzag stitch and follow this along and get it going. And then I always do a couple of back stitches when I get going. Now, I know my hand's kind of in the way. This is the struggle here with this. I'm going to lift my foot and adjust it so that I'm staying between the two sides of the rope and catching both ropes. So when you first get started, it's a small turn. So you're going to have to pivot. Lift your foot and pivot it around a couple times to make sure that you stay in line. And once you get a little further out, you don't have to keep doing that and it goes a lot faster. But here's my rope. So I'm just gonna hold it with my right hand and I know my hand's in here, but I'm trying to keep it out. There we go. And I'm gonna pivot a little bit. And you'll see once we get going how quickly this starts to build on itself. Making these coasters is a very fast project. So now that I've gotten going, I don't have to keep pivoting. You guys see that? I know my hand's the way. Let's switch to camera 3 while I get this going, if that's okay. For those who might want to know, this ball of rope that I'm sewing from is just sitting in my lap, but it can sit on your floor. It can sit in a basket so it doesn't roll away from you. Just make sure that it's somewhere where it's not going to get tangled up or twisted. Now, real quick, I want to mention that I'm not pulling on this rope at all. I'm not applying tension. We will do that when we start building our sides. But right now, I want this to stay nice and flat. So I do kind of keep my hand on it to hold it flat as it grows and builds. That's why this table, extension table, comes in so handy. But if you don't have one of those, again, some books right up, as long as it's level with the sewing surface. Now, typically for a coaster, I go about 4 to 5 inches in diameter. So I'll get out my little measuring tape and measure. I'm already past 3 inches. So it really doesn't take long to build onto these and make them really quickly. I'll go a little bit further and then I'll show you how I finish them off with a little loop. Okay, so now that I'm at this point, I'm just going to do, and there goes my ball of rope into the floor. I'm going to do a couple of back stitches just to secure it. And then I'm going to measure from my last stitch. I'm going to start adding the loop. So I'll show you one as an example. So we're going to make this little loop on it. This is just my preferred method of finishing these off. I think it's super cute. You could hang these if you wanted to. Some people will just cut the rope and do a bunch of stitches back and forth. I personally like to do a little decorative loop. I just think it's a fun way to finish it off. So let's switch back to camera 2 real quick and I'll show you how I do that. There we go. All right, so I'm going to measure, and this is totally preference on the size of the loop that you want, but I usually do around 4 inches. So I'm going to use my scissors and I'm just going to cut my rope. And now you can see that synthetic core again, and I really don't want that visible at the end of my loop here. So I'm going to just kind of use my fingers real quick and pull that out from the center and just trim a little bit of that off. And throw it right into my hair catcher. And then as I pull this rope back up, it's down in there further and you won't be able to see it. Okay, we're going to take our fray check. Just do a couple of dabs down in here. And kind of shape it. It's not going to be dry yet, but that's fine. It will dry. And then I'm going to back stitch just a few. Give myself some working room. So I'm going to show you real quick. Just kind of get you in here a little closer. This end is going to fold up right into where the thread is the rope is coming off of here, where I finished my last stitch, and it's going to wedge right in there. Okay, wedge it. There you go. I'm going to wedge it right in there, and these may stick up a little. That's fine. We're going to tack them down with a bunch of threads. And then what I like to do, and this is really helpful so this doesn't pop out because your foot will want to push this away. I take a pin and I kind of stick it in the side right here, and it goes through this rope, and into my coaster. Okay. And what we're going to do is stitch forward and follow along, like if we were still putting this on, up until about here. You want to have a little tail here, and then we're going to back stitch, and then we're going to stitch over this a couple of times, and you want to add a bunch of stitches here so it'll create a nice strong end right here. Another visible one is like on this basket, so you can see the threads. Okay, so that's what we're essentially going to be doing. So I'm just going to sew forward. We're going to sew back. I am going to lift my foot and just get that pin out real quick. We're going to pivot. There we go. There is the coaster all finished. So the decorative threads can be really fun in doing this project. I'm going to trim my threads real quick so you guys can see it. So there's a little coaster, and that's a fun little way to finish it off. This is the same way that I like to finish off my bowls. They're fun to a way to hang them or to grab them or to hold them. So these are my personal favorite. So now what I'm going to show you is how to build sides on a bowl. Okay. This is going to be using the same rope and thread. I'm going to reach over myself real quick. So what I did for time's sake is I went ahead and started a base for a bowl, and I kind of got to a stopping point, and now I'm ready to build on my sides. The way that you do that is you take it from being flat right here, and we're going to turn it up against the machine. Okay. I think actually, can I have you come help me real quick? Amy?
Yes.
This is the time where I need this to kind of be on this side. Otherwise, yeah, do you mind just having much that water right there? Thank you. We're just going to move the camera real quick so you guys can see from the other side. There we go. And then we'll get it positioned. I just want you guys to be able to see. And when you turn this up right, it's going to be harder. I know they're uneven. Okay, so we can get the. I got you. All right. So, all right. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I've got cords all around me, so it's kind of hard to get up. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to be sewing just like we did before. But once we get it to the width that we want, and for this bowl, I've got it to a little over 8.5. And we're going to now, once we get under the foot, we're going to take it and push it all the way up against the side of the machine right here. And you want to kind of hold it there with your hand while it's sewing. This is when we're going to start applying tension to our rope. And I'm going to kind of unwind this ball a little bit so I have plenty of rope. Now, the shape of your bowl is going to be determined based on the amount of tension that you pull when building your sides. So when I first start, I like to give a good amount of tension so I can get a sharp corner and a sharp edge as best I can. It's going to be rounded off eventually, but a sharper edge to the bowl when building the sides. But then I don't want it to keep caving in. I kind of want it to go straight or even more outward. Then that's going to depend on the tension. Okay, so this is something that you're just going to have to play around with and learn and figure out. But we're going to get this one going. So I'm going to stick it back under here. There we go. I'm just going to get it started. There we go. I'm going to turn this upright, and I'm going to put some tension here and just keep sewing. And I'm just holding it up with my left hand and just carefully using my fingers to kind of spin it. And you'll see in a second as it comes back around, it'll start to curve up. Get a little more rope going. I'm going to stop real quick. I like to stop with my needle down to hold my spot. I'm going to trim these threads real quick, but I wanted you all to see how even just one pass around, you see how it's starting to take shape and build its sides. It's that easy, and it's just about pulling on that tension. So when I first get going, I will probably do 2 or 3 passes around, pulling a good amount of tension, and then I start to let go a little bit because I want my bowl to have straight sides, not caving in. And it really doesn't take much to change the shape of your bowl when it comes to tension of pulling on the rope. Go around a couple more times so you guys can see it start to build. And you can take this as fast or as slow. I tend to sew really fast because these projects are so fun. I like to put on like an audio book in my headphones and just sit here and make a bunch of bowls, baskets. It's super fun. All right, so we made it all the way back around again, and you can see it's really starting to curve up and take shape. And all my stitches, you want to keep checking. My underside stitches are looking really good. This is what's going to be most visible when you're finished, the outside. But if you ever see any skips or loops or anything, you need to check and make sure this is threaded. Sometimes it can, because you're sewing such a heavy material, it can get a little off. So every time I go to change my bobbin, I rethread my whole machine just to make sure everything is working well. If you do get loops, it's super easy to take a seam ripper right between the two ropes that you just sewed. You pull all those little threads out and you can just pick up where you left off. You won't see, it's very forgiving in that regard. So just keep that in mind.
What type of foot are you using?
So this is a clear decorative foot. I chose to use this foot because it's clear, so it gives me really good visibility of both sides of the rope as I'm sewing.
Okay.
But you can use an open toe foot that also works really well, but just whatever you're comfortable with, and all-purpose foot is fine as well.
Okay, and then what tension do you have your machine set to?
It's set to 4, but every machine's a little different. So again, this is one where you're going to start with some rope at the beginning and just get the feel for what you like, what settings your machine needs to be at, and then kind of go from there and then start your project. This, my first bowl that I made, or basket I made, I'm going to show you guys at the end. It's not the prettiest one, but it was my first one. And I've learned a lot since then. So I'm hoping a lot of these tips will help you guys figure out what you like. Okay.
And just one more.
Sure.
How many yards of rope do you typically use to make a basket about the size that you're working on right now?
So I'm not really sure about the smaller bowls because I don't measure how much rope I have left. It depends on which rope I'm using. I will tell you the large baskets, and I'm going to show you one in a minute. The large baskets end up being about 200 feet.
Okay, thank you.
Of rope, give or take a few feet. So,
okay.
All right. Does that help answer the questions? All right. I'm going to go around one more time and just show you how this builds. All right, so we've made it all the way back around. This is why I also like to kind of back up before, or back stitch, I'm sorry, before I start sewing the sides, because it kind of lets me know where I started going up on the basket. One thing I wanted to point out, and I'm going to kind of zoom out. Oh, that's the wrong way. I'm going to tilt this up real quick so you guys can see the top of the machine. Okay, so you see how mine is coming up over this arm here of the machine, the top part of the machine. Any bowl or basket that you want to make, if it comes up and over, it's so much easier. If it's a smaller one that comes right here, it's going to be a lot harder to control the shape of it. And I tell you that from experience. Some of the smaller ones I've made, it's just easier if you can keep it nice and straight and vertical. With the smaller ones, as they start to build the sides here and it's pushing away from the machine, it is harder to control that. So just keep that in mind. But the ones that kind of come up and over this part of the top of your machine, this one's kind of snug, but it's there. It does make it easier because as this builds, it's going to kind of creep up. And that's when you're kind of sewing in from an angle so you can see what you're doing. Again, that's why I like to use a clear foot. Helps with visibility because as these baskets get bigger, and you'll see in a minute, it is a little harder to see in here when sewing. But now you know. I'm going to back stitch. And I'm going to reach over and take this one off. There we go. So you can see how it's starting to build on itself. And it is going to curl a little bit there. There we go. But yeah, this is how the basket will get started. and you're just going to keep going as tall as you want. It could be really shallow. Something like this would be really nice on a table with some fruit or decorations in it. But you can keep going up, and I like to, again, do a little loop on the end to finish it off for the smaller smaller bowls or baskets. So that's how to build your sides. You're just going to keep going until you're ready to be done. Okay, just make sure you have plenty of rope for that. And then the last thing I'm going to show you today is how to finish off the big baskets. And I think for the first part of this, we're going to go back to camera 1. Awesome. Are you guys having fun? Like, see how easy these rope projects really come to life? They just pop up real quick. All right. So for the big baskets, any questions real quick?
Before you show, I think
Yeah.
You want to know how to get the inverted.
To get it to come in, pull more tension. To get it to flare out, a lot less tension. And the sweet spot to go straight up and down is just kind of holding the rope there and doing very little tension. The more tension you have, you're going to kind of get it to kind of go in like this one. But it's one of those things you're just going to have to kind of play with. You know, I'm always, oh, I want this basket to go straight up. And when I get done, it's kind of more caved in. And I'm like, well, it's still really pretty and it's still functional and I still love it. So I have some that have gone way out as well. But let's, oh, you know what? We'll come back to the fabric. I didn't wrap the fabric on that last one. We'll do that in a minute. But let's show you how to do the handles real quick on this big basket. So this big basket, I did dye the rope. I dip dyed. So I started with one end and did it real dark. And then I just did a little bit. So it kind of made like this ombre effect. I thought that was something fun and different. And I've got all my leftover rope down in here. And what we're going to do, we have to kind of decide where our handles are going to go. So what I did, and this is in the instructions, when you start to get towards the end of your rope, you want to, towards the top of your basket is what I should say, where you want it to stop. You want to take it off the machine, back stitch, secure your stitches, take it off the machine and wrap it around once and mark that, and then measure 5 times of that, 5 or 6 times, to make sure you have plenty of rope to build your handles, because our handles are going to be 3 thick, but they're also going to extend out from our basket so that they're visible, just like these back here. So we're basically going to be making handles just like this for this basket. Okay. And so there's a little measuring that goes in with doing this. So let's do that real quick. I take it off my machine. I find where I kind of started here, and I kind of use that as like my center point. I'm going to bring this together in the middle. Okay. This is one end, this is the opposite end, and I'm going to use pins to find those ends, and I'm just going to drop a pin right in the middle, just like that. That's where the center of my handles are going to be. Then, depending on the size of your basket, you can make your handles as big or as small as you like. I'm going to take my tape measure and measure 2 inches on either side of that pin. That's the starting and stopping point of my handles. And I'm just going to place a pin on either side at the 2-inch mark. You can do 2 inches, you can do 2.5. It's totally up to you and your preference for your basket. All right, and I'm going to turn it around and do the other side. Do I have a question? We're good? Okay. So again, I'm going to measure 2 inches on both sides.
Have you ever made a lid for one of your baskets?
I have not made lids. There are a lot of videos showing how to make the lids. It's basically making the same thing, but just turning it upside down when you're done and not making it as tall. There's a lot of like measuring to make sure it's the same width or even a little wider. So if I wanted to put a lid on this, I wouldn't have done the loop. Right, I would have just finished it off with and stitched over the end, and then my lid would have to be a little wider to sit down over it. There's some people make them big enough to call tortilla warmers, so you can warm up your tortillas for taco night and then sit them down here, put the lid on it. It keeps them nice and warm while you're serving a little taco bar. So I have not made that yet. That's the next adventure. But okay, so I'm gonna check again. I'm pushing that in. I've got my centers and I've got my starting points on both sides. And now I'm ready to go back to the machine. And what we're going to do, I'm going to explain it here, and then hopefully you'll be able to follow along on the machine. I'm going to sew just like normal all the way to this first pin. And then I'm not going to sew my rope. I'm going to kind of leave it out. And then we're going to sew, catch it back on this end. One thing to do to control how far out it sticks is what I like to do here is, and we'll do it over at the machine, is I'll measure a little further past. So maybe like, I don't know, I don't want this one to stick out too far, but I want it to be noticeable. So I'm probably just going to do about 1.5 inches out. We can go ahead and mark it. It may have to be adjusted when we get on the machine. Let's just say here, okay? And we'll show all of that at the end, but that way our handles are sticking out of the basket instead of going along the edge, okay? This part does take a little measuring. Once you get the hang of it, it's super easy. So let's go back to the machine. We're gonna go back to camera 2. Now, you see this is the big basket, and you can see how once you get it on the machine, it really takes up a lot of space. I'm gonna stick my hand in there, get it back on there. There we go. I'm gonna drop my needle. And this is the time when I'm gonna show you guys this real quick. This top part of the, this is when you kind of have to, instead of holding the base, you're holding the top and you're holding it up off of the machine. Does that, you guys see that? Do I need to zoom out a little more? I am literally holding it up off of the machine. You don't want it to come hit the top of the machine. And then I'm going to use my right hand to control the rope again. And we're going to just stick around.
Lower your camera.
Oh, thank you.
Bethany, do you wash these baskets?
I have washed one that I'm going to show them. The first one I did because I used it to pick vegetables for my garden, and it got a little, funky from some squished tomatoes. So I have washed it, but it was not one that had been dyed. It's just plain. You can spot wash them too. The rope, I did wash the rope before I dyed it. So if it was a rope I was going to dye, I didn't wash it. And that, but the other ones I did not. Okay. Okay. So I'm at my first pin here, and I'm going to take my rope, and where I had marked an extra 1.5 inches, and I just want to make sure that that's still 1.5 inches. Let me just double check. Yeah, it's closer to 2. That's okay. I'm going to take this mark, and I'm going to put the rope. I hope you guys, can you guys see this? It's really hard for me to see what I'm doing, but I'm trying to avoid getting my hair in front of the camera. I'm going to pin this rope to this last pin. Okay. It's just going to go in right here where I had it. And that's going to create the beginning part of my handle, okay? And I'm going to leave that out. Instead of sewing around this, I'm going to sew back across this part right here. And I could take out this middle pin. We don't need to know the middle anymore. And I could take out this first pin because I don't want to sew over it. I just need this last one to hold it in place. So now I'm going to kind of pivot. I'm going to move this camera just a little. There you go. And so you guys can see what I'm doing here. All right, holding this up, and we're going to pivot in. And now this is loose, and I'm just going to sew along that previous stitches I did on the last time around. And then when I get back to my pen, I am going to pivot back. So I catch the rope on the outside again. There we go. Take that pin. We're just going to sew around. You want to make sure your rope doesn't get twisted and tangled, so be careful of that. All the way to this first pin again. For our next handle on the opposite side. And that's when I'm going to lift my foot, pivot, take that pin out. I wonder how many times I say pivot. Pivot makes me remind me of like the first episode. And it's stuck. There we go. It's stuck right there. Just gonna keep sewing. Before we do that, again, we need to measure and make sure that we have our spot marked for the length of our, the width of our handle. So we're going to go here. Have to be perfect. Definitely easier when you come at it from the other side. There we go. And we're going to sew the back across. We don't need that center pin anymore. Back to our next pin. We're just going to shift over, catch the thread or the rope again. And now it's easier. Once you get this started, it's so much easier. You'll see when we get back around to our first handle, just how easy it is to build your handles. The first part is always the hardest part. So we're back to our handle. And instead of sewing on the inside, we're now going to sew this piece that we left out and then the piece we're attaching together. So we're going to just kind of pull them straight, pull them both straight. Together. And then it'll naturally kind of feed back into the basket. Control keeps walking away from me. There we go. We're gonna turn it back into the basket. Doing my best to make sure that you guys can see, but it is one of those projects where you really have to like get in there and control it and tell it exactly where to go and what you want it to do. I'm just kind of untwisting my rope and we'll go back around the other side. Back to the handle. Rope's a little twisted here. It happens when you start to get towards the end of it, so untwist it. Take your time with this part. These are big baskets. I have to stop every so often just to adjust my left hand to hold it up off the machine. So take your time. This part is when it starts to get this big, it does get a little more challenging. So I definitely recommend starting with the flat coasters, and working up some small bowls, and then work your way up to doing the big baskets.
When
Yeah.
you are working on your baskets
Uh-huh.
and you run out of rope, how would you how would you go about adding in another?
So the question is, if I run out of rope and I need to add more rope to continue making my basket, how do I attach new rope? There's a couple of ways to do this. I personally think the best option is to make sure you have enough rope for the size basket so you don't have to swap ropes. That conjunction can be a little messy. One way to hide the blending of two ropes is wrapping the rope in fabric so you don't see that seam. It's a way that a lot of people will hide it. So that's what I would recommend doing. If you do have to attach a rope, two ends of a rope, you want to try to prevent it from having too much of a bump, because that bump is just going to carry as you continue to build. And then the top of your basket's going to have this little lump on it. So that's why I try to join the two ends. Maybe you stitch them together separately before you come back to the machine and start adding it to your basket. You can stitch them together, the two ends together, so they're more seamless. And then if you wanted to hide it with rope, you always could, or with wrapping it in fabric, you could always do that too. But I hope that helps
Yes, thank you.
answer that. And when we finish off the baskets, I'll tell you some other ways that you can finish it off besides the ways that I do it. Back to our handle. So we've got our two pieces together. Now we're going to do a third. I'm actually going to stop here just for time and take this off so you guys can see what we just added. So I'm going to go back to camera one real quick if we can. So here's our handles. And this side has 3, this side has 2. Personally, I probably will add a 4th row. It's totally up to you on preference. It depends on the size of the baskets as well. But this is how you add the handles. And then you could always bring it in and make it a little beach tote or whatever. But what I like to do to finish off the baskets is I will find the center point between my 2 handles. So that's right here. And I'll mark it with a pin. And this pin does not want to go in. I'll mark it with a pin and I'll sew to that center point, and then I backstitch a bunch, and then I take it off of the machine, and I will leave a tail, at least a 12-inch tail. And what I like to do is take some macrame beads, which is what I have displayed up here, but I'll show you on this basket. I like to tie a knot and attach a macrame bead, tie another knot and more beads. You can do as many as you want. You can paint them. You could do different types of things. They don't have to be macrame beads. But then I will tie it off, and then I will use, there's special combs for macrame combs that basically are these like hard wire, hard bristle combs. And you can use that on the end of your rope to give it this frayed kind of tassel look. And you'll still see the inside of that synthetic core, the colored part that we trimmed off. So you will braid it, like untangle it all. And then you'll take your scissors and you'll pull out, you kind of find that core and you'll cut it down. So mine's still right there, but I'll trim it all the way down so you don't see the color. And then you've got this little tassel on the end. And that's how I like to finish off my big baskets. Some people will stop right here. They'll cut the rope, they'll do a bunch of stitches, and then maybe they'll take a little piece of leather or faux leather and make a little cuff over that so you don't see it. It's totally preference, up to you on how you want to finish your basket. I just thought that was a little fun way to add some flair. And you can get the beads and the macrame comb at Michael's. I just use my dog's comb because I have a poodle and I have a toy poodle mix. And so this is a brush that gets tangles out really well. And you're basically unbraiding that tightrope with that brush. And so I just put it on the surface and just kind of brush it out. And that's how I like to finish this. So any questions about finishing that off? And then I'm going to go back and show them how to add the fabric.
Before you move to the fabric, can you talk real quickly about how you did dye your rope did it in one single piece, correct?
Yes, so this, for the question was how I dip dyed this. And I'll show you a couple. So this pink bowl, I put the whole skein of rope in the dye and let it sit. And I followed the instructions on the RIT dye verbatim. So you can kind of eyeball it with how long you want it to sit in the dye will determine how dark it is. But just know that when it's wet, it's going to be darker than when it dries. It dries lighter. So this one, I stuck the whole skein of rope in and I made a bunch of little projects with that. With the blue that I did, I think I have another one down here. I went across my living room floor back and forth with the whole skein, and then I just sectioned it off and I just like dyed some of it really like long time to get the darker blue, and then I dip dyed a little bit lighter, and then I left some natural, and I just sectioned it off with rubber bands so I would know which section was, and then because it was back and forth, you get kind of this back and forth pattern. And then for the ombre, I basically took 200 feet of rope and I blocked off a certain amount for natural, a certain amount for in the middle of the rope of the skein for the lighter gray. And then the other end, opposite end, was the dark black. So what I did is it was all dipped in black, but this part sat the longest, this part. And then I put this one in, this section in for a little bit, but not as long. So it'd be more of a gray. And then I left some out completely. So it kind of ombre up. So there's a lot of different ways that you can play around with it. I've seen people take 3 different primary colors and then have sections, dipped in each one. And then you kind of mix it between the two to get, the blue and the red makes the purple and the blue and yellow makes the green. So you can kind of get rainbow effect. I've seen people do that. There's a lot of different ways you can dip dye the rope. And you just kind of have to play around with it. The first thing I did was dip the whole thing just to get comfortable with it.
And then you just wash it out with water?
Yeah. So in the instructions on the bottle, it'll tell you how to rinse it out. I rinsed it till it kind of ran clear. And then I hung it because it was too cold outside. I hung it over my shower curtain rod and it just dried the next morning. It was dry. So it doesn't take that long to dry. You can hang it outside if you have nice weather, which is probably what I'll do when it gets warmer. But yeah, so it was super easy. And then I wound it all back up in a ball. They have not, I had a cup of water condensation, get on one of these, and it was on my white table and it never bled through. But you just have to make sure you rinse it really well after you dye it. But the dyeing process is kind of messy, but super fun. And it's a really cool way because once you get done dyeing it, you're like so excited to sew that because you just want to see what the end project's going to look like. And all of these, I never really knew what it was going to look like till it was done. So that was a good question about the dyeing. But yeah, just follow the instructions on the bottle and you'll just play around with it. So let's attach some fabric real quick because I meant to show you guys that earlier. And I want to make sure you guys learn how to do that. So we'll go back to this little bowl. Can we go back to camera 2 real quick, please? All right, so typically my bowl is sitting like this, or my basket, whichever, is sitting on the machine, and I want to attach my fabric here. So I'm going to lower this just a little, scooch it back so you guys can see what I'm doing. I'm zoomed out. Okay. So I have it kind of cut at an angle on one end. This is my bias cut fabric. So it's got that stretch. It's a woven fabric. So normally it doesn't really have a stretch, but when you cut it on the bias, you cut it at a 45-degree angle and you get this nice stretch and it prevents it from fraying on the edges. So if you need to learn how to do that, there's lots of videos on how to cut that. And I explain that in the instructions. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to just twist it around my rope at the top or wherever you want to start attaching it. And I just start winding it around. You want to get it really tight. So if you need to put a clip or a pin at the beginning just to hold it there when you first get started, you can. But if you get it tight enough, you shouldn't need one. And you're just gonna twist this on Now you can have long pieces, you can have short pieces, you can do them back to back. I've seen some people wrap an entire bowl in fabric. It's just personal preference. I like to just do sections to add a little color. And then when you get to the end, I'm going to trim this so I don't have to wind all of this. Get to the end, just kind of twist it around. And I will use a pin to hold the end in place, just like that. And then when it's time to sew it on, you're just going to sew it just like you normally would. Feed it through. Take my pin out. Yeah. And that's a fun, easy way to add color. And then as you go back around and you sew back around, you can have more rope that's wrapped in fabric, or you can have some that isn't, and you can just see the line. But it's just a fun little easy way to add a little speck of color. I don't know if I would do the black thread with that the fabric, but it's totally up to you. This is where you can get really creative. On this one right here, I used a black fabric that has paw prints on it. And this basket is actually the basket that my dogs keep their toys in my sewing room. So they have their own basket full of toys, and it's low enough to where my little poodle mix, she can get in there and get whatever toy she wants. But this is her toy basket, and I put little paw print fabric on it. So it's just a lot of different ways that you can decorate and be creative. So can we go back to camera one real quick, and I'll ask if we have any more questions.
I think we are good.
We good? Okay, so show of hands in the chat, like who's excited to make some projects with rope now? Like once I learned I could sew rope on a sewing machine, I was like, I have to do this. And then I just couldn't stop. And now I have rope baskets everywhere and the coasters everywhere. And I love giving them as gifts. They're really inexpensive to make and super fun and super quick. So
they are
loving it.
Yes,
awesome.
they
Awesome.
are so happy.
Was this a good project for to start out the
Yes.
new year with sewing with Singer here? I think this was a good one.
They're all going to buy rope now. So yeah.
No, hey, you know, you could make some for Easter baskets. That was the other thing I was going to show you. So this is my first one that I ever made. I told you it's not the prettiest basket, but I brought it to show you. It's got some stains from food and some vegetables in here. But I made a handle that goes across the top. And basically what I did is I took the rope. I'm going to find here's some pink rope. I'll show you. Instead of winding it tight at the beginning, I wound it however long I needed my handle to be, but I wound it this way. And then I sewed, you know, from here to here, and then from this end to this end, and then I wound it, and I turned the whole thing, and I sewed it down this side. And I did that, I think, 4 or 5 times, and I finished it off, and then I just attached it, with my machine, and then I have a handle that goes across the top, and this is great for putting on my arm and picking my tomatoes or my peppers or whatever out of my garden. So this was my first one. This one has gone through the washer and it's held up pretty well. But yeah, so this one I didn't get the flattest bottom because again, I didn't have the table on it. I didn't hold it up right. So this was my learning curve, but it still serves a purpose and it's very helpful. But this was the first handle I had ever done. So there's a lot of different ways you can do handles. So have fun with it, get creative. Again, use those hashtags. Tell them to me again real quick. I always draw blanks. Singer Sewing, hashtag Singer Sewing, hashtag Make It With Michaels, and hashtag Michaels Classes. Did I get them all right? Y'all, it's been a couple of months since we've done this. Forgive me. But anyways, I hope you guys have fun. We want to see your finished project, see how you take this to the next level. We gave you the foundation to start it. Now be creative, use those scrap fabrics, have fun. Dip dye some if you want, but we're excited that you guys joined us today. Again, this is recorded, so if you need to watch it back as you start your own project, it'll be on Michael's YouTube channel and michaels.com, and we will be seeing you guys again soon, and I look forward to it. All right, guys, have a good one. Thanks so much. Bye, guys.